the AI4D network and the friends of the network. And our speakers, the first speaker who will lead the discussion on the report is Hannah Miller, and she's the lead author at Oxford Insights in the UK. Our other speaker is Dr. Isaac Rutenberg. He's the director of the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology at Strathmore University in Kenya. Our next speaker is Fabrizio Scolini. He's executive director of the Latin American Open Data Initiative in Uruguay. And our last speaker, but not least, is Alex Condominios from Research ICT Africa. And also he's a AI4D policy and regulatory focal point, discussing the AI readiness from an African perspective. And I'm your moderator, and I'm also an AI4D policy and regulatory focal point in conjunction with Alex. So I will go straight to ask Anna to start her presentation, introducing the first global index on AI readiness. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, Robert. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah from Oxford Insights. I'm just going to share my screen with you to show you some slides. Okay, so I'm here to introduce the 2019 Government AI Readiness Index, which we've been working on. So just to give you some background, in 2017, we first posed the question, how ready is the government to implement AI to help with public service delivery? So we were interested in quantifying the capacity of governments to capture the innovative capabilities of AI to help transform their public service delivery. And this was the result. So this was the world's first Government AI Readiness Index, which we published in 2017. As you can see, it looked just at the readiness of OECD governments, measuring them against 9 indicators that we thought made a government ready to use AI. So fast forward 2 years, and now we have the 2019 Government AI Readiness Index, which we've produced with the support and help of the IDRC as part of their AI for Development initiative. So as you can see from the map, this year's index has been expanded in scope to include 194 countries and territories around the world. The full scores of all the countries and the data and report are due to be released next week on the 21st and will be available on the IDRC website and Oxford Insights website. But for the meantime, the top 10 ranked countries are listed on the right-hand side. The best performing region on average we found to be North America, while the worst performing regions are Africa and the Asia Pacific. The index highlights quite well the index highlights the current inequality in AI readiness between global governance, with countries in the global north faring on average better than those in the global south. So given we're on the cusp of seeing widespread AI implementation across a number of sectors, including public services, we hope that this is a timely reminder of the ongoing inequality that there is around access to AI globally. So just a bit of background on how we went about compiling the index. We started with our exam question, which was, how ready is any given government to implement AI in their public service delivery? And worked out some key areas or high-level clusters that we felt were vital to answering this question. And these are in orange on the slide here. Just walking through these briefly now. Governance, we felt this was an important dimension because governments ought to implement AI in a way that builds trust and legitimacy, which ideally requires legal and ethical frameworks to be in place for handling and protecting citizens' data, and comprehensive policy strategies to ensure that AI is implemented in a way that benefits citizens while protecting them from any risks. Second, infrastructure and data. As you know, AI systems are built on data, so the quality and availability of data, but also the ability of governments to work with it is crucial. Third, skills and education. So ideally, in order to develop and implement AI in public service delivery, there'll be a strong pool of in-country talent. So you can measure that through things such as AI skills and education or the strength of the AI sector. And finally, government and public services. An AI-ready government should display both strong political will and capacity to innovate. So once we had these 4 clusters, we broke them down into 11 individual indicators to work out what it was that we needed to measure. So then we found data sources to match up against each of these indicators. So these range from, in some cases, well-respected international surveys like the UN Government Index. In some cases, we carried out our own desk research where no indices or databases were already available, and in other cases, we mined more direct sources for data like Crunchbase data on the number of AI startups. So some more detail on these indicators and the sources we used, which are in orange. I'm not going to run through them all, but just to pick out a couple of interest. For data protection and privacy laws, we wanted to capture a kind of ethical dimension to the governance cluster. And we predict that further down the line, this indicator might be a specific one, something like Estonia's an AI liability bill, but not as many countries have this kind of legislation in place yet. So for now, we're relying on the UN Data Protection and Privacy Legislation database. We did our own desk research into which countries had comprehensive AI strategies as kind of evidence that national governments were coming up with policy strategies to address the potential challenges around AI. Other data sources we use, like the UN e-Government Development Index, we use that as a proxy for data and AI capability in government to represent the kind of general e-government capability. And a number of AI startups, we mined Crunchbase to this to get a number of startups for each country. The full indicators and more detail about them will be in the report, which is released next week. So in terms of how we actually calculated the rankings, in most cases, we just took the clean data from these indices and we normalized it to make the data comparable. One notable exception was the Crunchbase database, which skewed quite heavily towards Silicon Valley and the USA. So to mitigate the impact of this on the rankings, we applied a logarithmic scale before we normalized to give a better sense of the relative intensity of private sector strength rather than an absolute number of startups per country. And then we added the numbers together to give us our scores for AI readiness for each country. A methodological issue, a significant methodological issue we encountered whilst doing the index was the problem of missing data points. So where possible, we used UN or similar databases that covered all of or as many of our countries as possible, but this wasn't always possible for every single one of our indicators. So where there wasn't a comprehensive database or index, we did as much research as we could and found the best, like, high-quality database that covered as many of our countries as possible. And we made the decision not to interpolate missing data points because we decided that we didn't feel comfortable to be able to do this sufficiently accurately, and we also felt that the absence of data points for countries was in itself revealing and something of a finding. Unfortunately, this does tend to mean that countries with missing data points, their scores suffer as a result. And unfortunately, this does benefit countries with stronger economies, which were generally better represented in the data. China also is a good example of a country which scored less highly than we might have expected, partly as a result of a missing data point in one of the indices, but also as a result of some of the governance indices, which are skewed to reward democracies disproportionately, which highlights another kind of limitation of indices of this nature, which is that you begin by constructing a kind of idealized image of the thing you're trying to measure. And in doing so, you are incorporating some biases and some, in our case, Western-centric views of looking at the world. So what makes an AI-ready government? And so we acknowledge it as a shortcoming, and we tried to address this through consulting internationally on our methodology while we were constructing it, and also by compiling a report which is made up of commentary submitted by regional experts, which we hope adds some more knowledge and further context to our numeric findings. So finally, I'd just like to say that the purpose of assessing and scoring government's AI readiness is not to create or fuel a global race for AI, but rather we hope that the index can be viewed as a sort of toolkit to help policymakers everywhere see where they're performing well and which areas they may wish to target their attention going forward. So governments might look to focus on building a national AI strategy, improving STEM skills in the general population, or making more data available to help improve their AI readiness. So our intended contribution through the index is to encourage all governments, whether in the global north or south, to be as prepared as possible to help their citizens take advantage of the coming so-called fourth industrial revolution while protecting systems from the risks associated with it. And that's all.
Sorry. Jumping in here. This is Kai. I think. Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. Thank you very much, Hannah, for that wonderful presentation and just really highlighting what the index is about. It was just interesting that I was, while I was preparing for this moderation, I came across a statistic where McKinsey have done a report where they say that AI could transform society 10 times faster, and actually, which means 300 times the scale or 3,000 times the impact of the Industrial Revolution. So it's really important that we have a toolkit as this, and as ambitious as this project was, it's really important that we have this kind of data to know how best to proceed forward. The other observation I made was that even the countries in the top 10, top 20 have just very recently started crystallizing their AI strategies. So we're not very far back, some of the countries, let's say like in the different regions in Africa and in the global south. And I'm going to turn to Isaac now to give us a perspective about Africa. Welcome, Isaac.
Thank you, Robert. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I have the benefit of sitting right next to Robert, so he can tell me if I'm going over time. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining on this. I was fortunate enough to get a sneak peek of the data set several weeks ago and to do a bit of a review on that. So I just have 5 points that I'll mention, and hopefully it'll be less than 10 minutes for all that. The first one is already pretty well covered, that being the methodology. And really my only addition to that is to confirm what Hannah has said, in the sense that it's definitely a self-selecting kind of an exercise when you start looking only at online resources. Africa and well, I don't know anything about Asia, but I can certainly say African countries tend not to put a lot of what they're doing online, So, for example, the Kenyan government, Kenya actually ranked highest in all of the African countries, really close to Tunisia. And Kenya, the government's websites are just really quite awful, not up to date at all, don't discuss anything about what they're doing. So you really cannot go by what's online to really get a handle on the situation with respect to the Kenyan government. And I'm assuming that that's, well, from my experience, that seems to be true for most of at least sub-Saharan Africa. So moving on from methodology to my second point on the ground observations. If you look at the policy discussions that are happening, the only ones that you can find online are from the Kenyan government and Tunisia, which both rank quite respectably in right around the 50 mark on the 100 and however many countries, 180 or plus countries in the rankings. But quite a lot of other countries, we at least have had preliminary discussions, maybe not full-blown policy discussions, but I would say informal. The governments are aware of these technologies. They're aware that the technologies have potential. I would definitely say that they don't have coherent policies or really any plans to make them in the very near future, meaning in the next year or two, but down the line, maybe 5 years, potentially. So the other on-the-ground observation is that AI seems to be unlike almost any other innovation space that I've had any experience in Africa. And specifically, what I mean by that is that the driving factors, the driving forces in the innovation of AI are large companies, whereas for most other innovations, the driving factors are actually individuals or small companies. The AI research, from my observations, seem to be coming from the companies such as the major telecoms, international companies that are present here, IBM and Microsoft, etc., and also homegrown large IT companies. So that's a bit different, and I can only assume it's because of the complexity of the technology. That's part of it. Well, and also the need for large data sets to make it work, which I'll get to in just a second. The third point is this concept that I wrote about, which I didn't explain very well in my writing, and Robert was kind enough to point that out, and that is this idea of second mover advantage. We're all very familiar with first mover advantage, but I think Africa actually has a second mover advantage, and maybe this is just looking at something that's a little depressing in the most positive light possible, but it's actually kind of nice that we get to see how other countries integrate AI, and we get to learn from their mistakes, and not necessarily rush headlong into full integration, full use of a technology that, quite frankly, no one really fully understands. And so, for example, we saw just today reports that the city of San Francisco has now banned facial recognition technologies for use by police and other city or government agencies. So, while a lot of countries and governments and probably a lot of states in the U.S. even are rushing to start implementing AI and machine learning and examples such as facial recognition, it's very interesting that practically the home of these technologies is saying, no, we actually shouldn't use this. And so we can sit back and kind of see what plays out by such developments and see, is this a good idea? What are the benefits? What are the risks? Fourth, almost final, penultimately, a bit of speculation on my part, and that is that AI has, for decades at least, I think, been feared by many as something that will take jobs away from people, will make all people redundant in so many different ways, from driverless cars to manufacturing jobs and all those sorts of things. My speculation is that sort of impact will be very minimal on the African continent for two reasons. One, if you have ever driven in Africa, you will know that it is not an easy task, and so an AI product that is built for the West is going to bog down quite substantially when it encounters the nuances, shall I say, of the situation of the context in Africa. But secondly, also, AI is supposed to or is really good at replacing certain repetitive jobs, whether that be drivers or people filling out, people creating basic contracts or what have you. A lot of those jobs in Africa are actually quite low paying, and so the cost of implementing an AI might actually be quite a lot higher than paying people, whereas the cost of personnel in the West is substantial in most projects. It's actually quite low here. It's more the costs are more for the for raw materials and that sort of thing. And finally, I'm just going to also speculate here, and that would be, will AI result in higher inequality? We've all heard about this. I think that it's certainly going to play out in Africa, at least as much as anywhere else. I'm pretty sure we'll hear some terms such as data poverty and data curse, in sort of analogous to the oil curse. Those terms are going to become quite common. A lot of these AI resources are open source, but that doesn't help when AI is more or less useless if you don't have really large data sets. And the one thing we don't have in Africa is very large data sets. So I do believe that there's a lot that can be done here. If you look at the index, you'll see Africa is one big red area, and red is bad. So I mean, for sure, there's a lot to be done and a lot to be studied as well. And with that, I will turn it back to Robert. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Isaac, for that. I'd definitely, yes, like to reiterate the point you made about job losses. For instance, the World Economic Forum has estimated that AI and robotics will absorb about 5 million jobs from 2020. By 2020, that's next year. And definitely then we need to think about strategies about how to alleviate this inequalities. And even as Anna was saying, and from those two presentations already, you can see that there's a potential for AI to reinforce existing inequalities between the global south and the north. And I would like already the speakers to start thinking about strategies that can be used to mitigate against that. And moving on to the next speaker, I would like to give this chance to Fabrizio to tell us more about his region in Latin America. Welcome, Fabrizio.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I am going to turn my camera so you get to know my face. And you get to see Marco as well with me this morning, who happens to be sleeping on my shoulder, but that's great for all of us in this meeting. So my presentation here is mostly a reaction to Hannah's report, which I think is excellent and provides a great overview of the problems and the challenges and the opportunities our countries are facing in light of the emergence of the AI field. I'm the coordinator of the Latin American Open Data Initiative. The Latin American Open Data Initiative is an action research center, and one of our key strategic lines this couple of years is around the use of artificial intelligence technologies in Latin America. And we have actually developed a paper that soon is going to be in English, which we title Automating with Caution, which actually is about how these technologies are being adopted by Latin American governments. And we developed a set of case studies around the region to understand a bit more. And I would like to share 3 stories about how governments are actually adopting these technologies that come actually from across the river. I'm based in Uruguay, and the cases we collected are actually in Argentina. One where a government at a provincial level decided to use artificial intelligence techniques to potentially predict teenage pregnancy. Similarly, this government also decided to use this technique to potentially predict how to allocate social benefits to a marginalized population. And also there's the case of not the government, but actually business using techniques to potentially predict, or to potentially as well, first of all, to identify and then potentially predict the evolution of slums across Buenos Aires. And these cases are very different in their objectives, but very dependent on one thing that we know most about, which is data. And it's one of the issues we look in wow, there's something. Someone has a bird in the stream. I don't know who is it. So the crucial element in one of these cases is that part of the data that is used to potentially predict, for instance, teenage pregnancy is potentially biased. It only includes part of the population, and as a result, the techniques applied end up with a biased result that could potentially influence the way public policy is made in order to cater for this particular problem. Also, these kind of techniques could lead to discrimination and could lead to potentially harm to women in this particular challenging condition. The same problem applies to the other two cases, although in the case of identifying slums, the data available is really good and also is combined with a set of measures that the government is taking to make sure that the actions based on the predictions and on the algorithms are actually accurate. So these cases show also the challenges that we are going to face, not only around the techniques itself and the criteria we use to design them, but also it offers a challenge around the issue of data availability and how can we potentially develop accountability mechanisms around these techniques. And that's one element that I would like to highlight, which is around how, as governments start adopting these technologies, how do we develop the right data policies and the right accountability techniques so we don't end up in undesirable situations where policy is based on either skewed or biased information and biased processing of that information. The second issue I would like to reflect on is more on the policy side of things. And I think the index there is very clear about how Latin America is faring in this particular area. We recently developed a workshop with our colleagues from CIDE in Mexico and here in Montevideo, gathering policymakers from all Latin America to understand how governments are going to step in and potentially direct the evolution of AI in the public sector. We found out that only a couple of governments actually have a policy around this area. One of these governments is the Uruguayan government that developed a specific policy for the public sector and for the business sector, like an industrial policy around AI. And the other government is the government of Mexico, who so far developed a basis for the national policy. But the way these policies were developed certainly is complex. Like it involved a lot of consultation in the Uruguayan case, and to date it is uncertain how these policies will unfold. And only a few countries across Latin America are considering setting up these policies. So, this calls for reflection on how to properly inform and alert the public sector that the AI field is evolving, that, considering the public sector in Latin America is usually very fragmented, we need to find out ways in which we provide guidelines and ethical guidelines and technical guidelines on how to adopt these technologies. And finally, there's the issue of inclusion and capacity, which is something we found out is problematic. And this is it's not that Latin America, we are missing or lacking capacity. The problem is how to structure that capacity. As a result, as part of this research project, we found out that there are that you don't need to the larger is to build solutions that are tailored to the Latin American context. And this is challenging to do, and it's part of our mapping effort that we will be taking in the next 2 years or so, to understand who is doing what and to help them to structure it. Yes, Joy, I will stop moving right now. And then I think, but yeah, it's a bit challenging at the moment because if I stop moving, my kid will start screaming, and you don't want the kid screaming, right? So at the moment that's basically what we are doing. These three issues that we are dealing with. We hope that in the next 2 years we are going to undertake a closer look, and hopefully in the next month you will see an English document published for right on time for the Data for Policy Forum in London, where we are going to be introducing these topics. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions about this issue if you have them.
Yeah. Okay, I'm back. Hello. Really nice exposition. 3 case studies telling us about the possibility. If you don't have good data, then there's possibility for bias and therefore discrimination and further harms, and the importance of developing accountability measures and the proper policies. And we look forward to the paper that you are working on for the Policy Forum in London. I think something that we're also not touching on, I like that we're talking about policy, but how about investment? The report talks about significant investments that have been made by the Global North, and I know that we can say that the Global South might not be able to afford similar investments. For instance, the US in 2016 invested like $2 billion, Russia 12.5 million, Australia something to the tune of 20 million per year. These are like annual figures. Canada some 92 million per year. Again, I'm still insisting, how can we bridge the gaps in funding, even as we work on, sort of policy measures? And as we think about that, I would like to give the floor to Alex from Research ICT Africa. I know Alex has been working on some specific research, particularly in South Africa. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes,
can you hear me?
yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you, Alex. Welcome.
Okay. Sure. And you see my screen. I'm Alex Komnenos. I'm with Research ICT. Just from Kenya and Zimbabwe, looking on the African continent. I'm also with the AI4D network. And the first point I'd like to make is that AI readiness is in terms of measuring a country's readiness for technology. This is definitely not a new thing. We have since the 90s talk about technological readiness and then e-readiness and then a conceptualization of the skills and requirements and technological readinesses involved in different indices. So yeah, this is of a broader research and policy program. And then between variables that may not exist. I think to better understand ICT access and usage in order to understand AI readiness properly, and also in a qualitative sense, because there are particular nuances, and I'm speaking now about the African continent, towards how AI is implemented and used by people. So that's my first point. My second point is that this is a discourse about readiness for something, and it's a discourse that inspires, or that could inspire action, and that can be good action and that can be bad action. And Isaac made the point about the virtue of being a late mover. I think we are still so many technologies that intersect into what is conceived of as AI. And so a rush to have a policy on AI just for the sake of having a policy on AI could be unproductive in certain contexts. And then I do want to move on to the point, I do want to move on to the indicators in the index, and I think the index is an excellent aggregation of indicators. There's a few issues and biases which were well pointed out by Hannah. So yeah, the knowledge for development has, and I can share my screen now, a list of AI startups in Africa that they're mapping, and there is a vibrant small parts of it, and networks, lots of networks. The AI4D conference in Nairobi made me aware of the extent of these maybe exist outside of the CN.
Alex? Alex, we're losing you. We can't really hear you. We've lost you entirely. Alex? Okay, I think we're going to have to move on, and maybe if he joins us, then we're going to give him some chance to extrapolate his point.
Better data legislation
Alex?
than others. Pardon?
Alex, can you hear me? We lost
yes.
you, and we lost you completely. We can't see your slides. Would you mind trying the slides at least one more time?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but intermittently, so your connection is not very strong, it seems.
Okay. Well, I can't tell you much about my connection, and my slides are
I think
not
maybe
relevant to the conversation, so I'm going to...
Maybe you can just stop your video, because maybe the connection is not very good. That might help your audibility.
Okay, I have stopped my video. Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello.
Yes, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
we can hear you.
You can hear me better. Okay, sure. Sorry, I don't have the best bandwidth. Bandwidth, I guess, will bring me to another point about indicators that are incredibly important. Is access to quality of access and infrastructures like electricity in order to enable AI and the fourth industrial revolution. So when I cut out, I was just talking about the two governance variables. I think the binary existence of a data protection legislation or not is problematic. Eventually, all countries will have data protection legislations. Some just might be data protection by name. So I think added into the index should be transparency and other indices, and perhaps data from, like, for example, the Freedom House Internet Freedom Index. So those are my points about governance. And then lastly, I do want to move on to, there was a point made by Isaac about it's the big companies that are playing in AI. And I believe it is the big companies that are driving it, but often the big companies have driven it to the extent that you can use Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and I'm not advertising any of these cloud platforms. We should also be building this infrastructure at home. So yeah, we should also be building this infrastructure at home. But AI is very cheap to play around with. Machine learning algorithms are free from Google TensorFlow. You can run it locally on your computer. You don't even need to have it on the cloud. So it doesn't have to be the big players who dominate. I think application is very important, and I'm not going to use the word because there were very big problems with this concept, but 15 years back we were talking in the ICT4D community about leapfrogging. So in terms of access to computational intelligence to build applications with it, there is a bit of a leapfrogging happening now, because 15 years ago you would have to pay for access to a data center. Now it happens in the cloud in a pay-as-you-go manner. So I think there's some strategic opportunities there. And I think I might be out of time now.
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. So those are my points. And otherwise, it's a great index, and my research is on AI readiness, and it's a great start for understanding what AI readiness would entail and how I would apply that to a single case country context like South Africa.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex, for that. And sorry that we lost you for a bit, but I would want to open the next few minutes, about 11 minutes to the end, for questions. Would anyone be having a question? I would ask you first unmute your mic, and then if you're able to direct your question to one of the speakers, that would be even better, so that they can be able to prepare quickly. And let's have a first round of like 3 questions, please. You can also type your question in the comments section, and I will read it out if you're not able to unmute your microphone or speak. So we have a question by Joy. Have any governments published the algorithms they use? If you would know. That's the first question. Thank you, Joy. there's a question for Alex. That you mentioned that there was potential problems for countries rushing to have AI strategy for the sake of itself. Could you talk more about those risks or how they have manifested so far?
Talk more about the risks or how
Yes.
they have manifested so far. Okay,
Yes.
I'm reading the question. Okay. Yeah, well, I think firstly, the risk is you have a policy about AI. Now, is this policy going to affect the digital intermediation of work? And I'm talking here about Uber drivers. So it was said that labor costs are low here and AI is not likely to affect us. But okay, Uber is a system that uses AI, and there is a need for labor regulations. There's a need for safety regulations. There's a history of there's a history of approaches adopted to technology that is a technology regulation approach rather than like let's regulate this in this certain sector. So Lyft, for example, will try to say that it's not a transport company or a taxi company, but so that's one risk. So in countries where you have these important if you have these important policy discussions and legislative and regulatory and human rights discussions, what is an AI policy going to do then if it jumps into that space and suddenly it's talked about in terms of AI rather in terms of how transport of people is regulated and how labor is regulated?
Yes, thanks, Alex. I think that's really important to point out the fact that yes, we say that technology leads the law, but eventually what people don't realize is that the law catches up. And when it does, there's problems. And you've seen the resistance to, like you were saying, Uber, especially like in Europe and other places, Airbnb and housing policies and seemingly unfair playing field that technology apps have over other more traditional ways of doing business. So yes, I do believe this has to be factored into the governance space. And I would also want to, Anna, if you could respond to my earlier question about, yes, we've pointed out the inequalities and the risks involved. What are some of the mitigating practices that we can implement, especially in the Global South?
Well, looking back to the idea of the index as a kind of toolkit, I think it is useful insofar as it can highlight specific areas where policies and policymakers should focus their attention, whether that be, a low score for data availability or an AI strategy, whatever it is. I think it is useful as a kind of way to help people target their attention. And another sort of mechanism that came out quite a bit through the report and the research we did around the numbers was that there's a lot of talk about a global sort of race for AI and a competition and everything like that. But there is also going on amongst this quite a great deal of collaboration between governments and industry. But there's a number of kind of bilateral initiatives and multilateral initiatives like we've seen with the EU working together. We've got Canada and France working together. The UAE and India have signed an agreement. And I think that collaboration could be a really positive mechanism for countries in the Global South to improve their AI readiness, because a lot of the issues that countries are grappling with around AI are the same. I mean, obviously every country has its own unique circumstances, but at the root of it, there's a lot of very similar issues. So I think collaboration could be a really positive mechanism for countries to help to work together to improve their AI readiness.
Great, thanks, Anna. And I saw a lot of that, especially in Europe, and I would want to thank you for that. And just jumping off on that point as well, I'd want to challenge Isaac when he said, I think there's some problems with this connectivity, but I think I just wanted to comment on the point he was making earlier about the need for data and that being sort of fundamental to the next, Africa being able to implement AI strategies properly. But I would want to point out to also writing by some people, for instance, like Virginia Dignam, who said that actually, so currently when people talk about AI, they're mostly referring to machine learning. And she says, that's kind of coming to an end, actually, and that we have to focus more on sort of symbolic reasoning and the more sophisticated forms of AI that will not necessarily need data, but will need much more sophisticated forms of argumentation and things like that. And that's actually an area where Europe, where I did my PhD, have a strong culture. So we do also have to think about other dimensions for research as well. And that also supports the point you were making about, San Francisco banning facial recognition technology, because we saw it's the academics and researchers that have come out and said this technology should be banned, however innovative, for the balancing of innovation with human rights. I'd also want to read a comment by Moses, who says, I believe this is Moses Karanja, right? Any framework for deploying AI systems should ideally create incentives for investment in high-speed and reliable network connectivity. And I believe that's the second theme that Anna presented about data and infrastructure. So Moses continues, however, development of AI, like any other type of innovation in the digital economy, tends to suffer a lot, especially in Africa, where connectivity is poor and where governments frequently interfere with or shut down networks to control the flow of information. So information controls comes up again, and something that we have to think about. We've seen governments shutting down the internet or even censoring the internet, and this is around the world, not just in Kenya. But Isaac has been able to rejoin. I'd want him to respond to my challenge. Maybe he agrees or doesn't agree. The idea that we need data and we need data sets, strong data sets, to be able to leverage AI. So I was saying that that has actually largely come to an end. And some people have been pointing out that that's focused on machine learning, but we should focus on other areas of AI as well.
Okay, I'm not sure that I can agree that machine learning or any aspect of AI has come to an end, at least in Africa, where it was very clear that we're way behind on development of solutions for local problems. What I can tell you is that, well, as I said, AI tools are open source, so it's not the tools that make them valuable. I mean, anybody can access these tools. What makes it valuable is the data set that causes the AI to work better and maybe a competitor. So, are there more pioneering areas of AI that we should be focusing on? Absolutely. Should we ignore machine learning in an area where we have not collected the data, where we have not adapted those technologies that maybe are becoming standardized or well known in other areas? I don't think we should ignore those at all. Still here.
Yes, I wasn't saying we ignore them. I was just saying that.
Right. I mean, obviously,
yeah.
We're being a little hyperbolic here, but I think the point is made.
Okay. So, any other questions? Oh, and actually, we've come to the top of the hour. So, this session has been recorded and will be shared with all of you and also online on all our platforms. I would like to give a big thanks to the panelists, our speakers for today. I'd also want to give thanks to our 50-plus participants today being able to join in for this webinar. And thank you very much. And congratulations to Anna and IDRC on the work that you've done on the Global Index. Thank you very much, all. So that will be for it. And hopefully we'll be able to, the AI4D network continues to sponsor dialogue in this area, and we will be continually calling out on you for different other events. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Have a good evening.